The city of Babylon sat on the Euphrates, in the flat alluvial plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the land the Greeks called Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. By the 6th century before the Common Era, it was the largest city in the world. Its walls, Herodotus tells us, ran for more than 80 kilometers and were broad enough to drive a chariot along the top. The Ishtar Gate, decorated with lions and dragons in glazed blue brick, opened onto the processional way, a boulevard paved with limestone and bordered with walls of blue tile. At the heart of this city stood a temple complex called the Esagila, dedicated to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. And beside the Esagila, rising from a vast stone platform, stood the ziggurat. Its name was Etemenanki. In Sumerian, this means the foundation of heaven and earth. Ziggurats were not unique to Babylon. They were built across Mesopotamia for more than 2,000 years, stepped, rectangular towers of mud brick rising in tiers toward the sky, with a temple or shrine at the summit. The one at Ur, built around 2100 before the Common Era, still partly stands. They were mountains made by human hands, in a land where no mountains existed. Stairways between earth and heaven. Etemenanki was the greatest of them. And its history is longer and more complicated than the story in Genesis. The ziggurat at Babylon was ancient long before Nebuchadnezzar. It had been built, destroyed, rebuilt, neglected, and rebuilt again over the course of more than 1,000 years. The earliest references date to the Old Babylonian period, around 1800 before the Common Era. When the Assyrian king Sennacherib sacked Babylon in 689 before the Common Era, he claimed to have destroyed the ziggurat utterly, razed it and thrown the rubble into the river. His son, Esarhaddon, began to rebuild it. But the work was not completed. It was Nebuchadnezzar II who finished the work. He reigned from about 605 to 562 before the Common Era, and he was, above all else, a builder. He rebuilt the city walls. He paved the processional way. He constructed the Ishtar Gate. And he restored Etemenanki to its full height. His own inscriptions describe the project in detail. He writes of laying the foundation in bitumen and baked brick. He writes of raising the tower to its ancient height. He writes of cladding the summit temple in glazed blue brick so that it would shine like lapis lazuli against the sky. The king did not see this as a display of arrogance. He saw it as a sacred duty. The ziggurat was the home of Marduk, the god who had created the world. To rebuild it was to restore the cosmic order. To neglect it was to invite ruin. What did Etemenanki look like? We have two principal accounts. The first is from Herodotus, who visited Babylon, or claimed to, in the mid-5th century before the Common Era, roughly a century after Nebuchadnezzar's death. He describes a solid tower of baked brick, 1-starred in length and 1-starred in breadth, roughly 180 meters on each side. Upon this tower, he says, another tower was set, and upon that another, and so on up to 8 towers in all. A ramp wound around the outside, spiraling upward, with resting places and benches at the halfway point. At the summit was a great temple containing a golden couch and a golden table, where no one slept but a single woman chosen by the god. The second account comes from a cuneiform tablet known as the Esagila tablet, dating to the Hellenistic period but believed to copy an older Babylonian original. This tablet gives precise measurements. The base was 91 meters on each side. The tower rose in 7 stages to a height of 91 meters, as tall as it was wide. A perfect cube, viewed from the right angle. These measurements may be idealized, but they give a structure roughly the height of a modern 30-story building. In a city of single-story mud brick houses, on a flat plain where the horizon stretched unbroken in every direction, Etemenanki would have been visible from an immense distance. And now we come to the other story. The one you know. In the book of Genesis, chapter 11, the descendants of Noah settle on a plain in the land of Shinar. They say to one another, "Come, let us build a city, and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth." God sees the tower. He is displeased. He confuses their language, so they can no longer understand one another. The construction ceases. The people scatter. The place is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the speech of all the earth. It is one of the most famous stories ever told. And it is, almost certainly, a story about Etemenanki. The Hebrew word Babel is the Hebrew form of the Akkadian Babilim, the gate of God. The authors of Genesis knew Babylon. Many of them had lived there. The Babylonian exile, the deportation of the Jewish elite to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar in 597 and 586 before the Common Era, brought the scribes of Judah face to face with the greatest city in the world. And the greatest structure in that city was the ziggurat. The Genesis account is a polemic. A conquered people's answer to the monument of their conqueror. The Babylonian said the tower reached heaven because it was the home of the God who created the world. The Hebrew writers said it reached heaven because its builders were proud, and God punished that pride. But there is something deeper in the story, something older than the polemic. The Babylonians themselves had a myth about the origins of language. In the Enuma Elish, the great creation epic recited each year at the New Year festival in the Asagila, Marduk creates the world from the body of the sea goddess Tiamat. He establishes order from chaos. He gives things their names. In Babylonian thought, to name a thing was to give it reality. Language was not merely a tool. It was the structure of the cosmos itself. The idea that language could be shattered, that the words could fail, was, for the Babylonians as for the Hebrews, the deepest possible catastrophe. Not merely confusion. The unmaking of the world. Etemenanki did not fall all at once. When the Persian king Xerxes conquered Babylon in 482 before the Common Era, he damaged the ziggurat, though how severely is debated. By the time Alexander the Great entered Babylon in 331 before the Common Era, the tower was in a state of partial ruin. Alexander, who admired Babylon and intended to make it his capital, ordered the rubble cleared so that the ziggurat could be rebuilt. 10,000 men, according to the ancient sources, worked for 2 months to remove the debris. But Alexander died in Babylon in 323, at the age of 32, and the reconstruction was never completed. His successors had other priorities. The rubble was cleared, but no new bricks were laid. Over the following centuries, the remaining structure was used as a quarry. Farmers and builders took the baked bricks, good bricks, hard-fired, stamped with a king's name, for their own purposes. The bitumen was prized out and reused. Layer by layer, course by course, Etemenanki was dismantled by the people who lived in its shadow. Today, the site of Etemenanki is a square depression in the ground, south of the village of Jumjuma, near the modern city of Hilla in central Iraq. The depression measures roughly 90 meters on each side, matching the dimensions given on the Asagila tablet. A shallow pool of water collects there in the rainy season. Reeds grow in it. There is nothing to see. No tower. No ramp. No blue-glazed temple at the summit. Nothing but a square hole in the earth and the faint traces of foundation walls. Robert Coldway, the German archaeologist who excavated Babylon from 1899 to 1917, identified the site and mapped its dimensions. He found the remains of the outer walls, the traces of the staircases, and fragments of blue-glazed brick from the summit temple. But the ziggurat itself was gone. Taken, brick by brick, over 2 millennia. And yet the bricks survive. They are in museums in Berlin, London, Paris, Baghdad, and Chicago. They are in private collections. They are in the walls of farmhouses in the Iraqi countryside, where they have served as building material for centuries. Each one bears the same inscription, pressed into the wet clay by a stamp before firing: Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, provider for Esagila and Ezida, firstborn son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, am I. The king's name, repeated on tens of thousands of bricks, scattered across the plain. A name that outlasted the tower. That outlasted the city. That outlasted the empire and the language and the religion and the civilization that produced it. The tower is gone. The bricks remain. And on each one, a king is still speaking, in a language no one spoke for 2,000 years, announcing that he built this. That he was here. There is a passage in the Enumerelish that is worth holding in mind, as you close your eyes. After Marduk creates the world and establishes order, the gods build him a temple. They make bricks. They lay foundations. They raise walls. And when the temple is finished, Marduk names it. He calls it Babylon, Babilim, the gate of God. In the myth, the building of the tower is not an act of pride. It is an act of gratitude. The gods build it for the God who made them a world to live in. And the name they give it, the gate of God, means that the tower is not an assault on heaven. It is an invitation. A door left open. The Hebrew writers saw arrogance. The Babylonian writers saw devotion. The tower stood at the intersection of these two stories, rising from the flat brown plain, visible for miles, meaning different things to different people standing in its shadow. That, perhaps, is the most human thing about it. The tower is gone now. The square hole in the ground fills with rainwater in winter and dries to cracked mud in summer. The village nearby is quiet. The Euphrates, which once flowed beside the ziggurat, has shifted its course and run several kilometers to the west. But the bricks are still out there, in the fields, in the museums, in the walls of houses built on the ruins of houses built on the ruins of Babylon. Each one stamped with a name. Each one a fragment of a structure that once touched the sky, or tried to. Or was meant to. Close your eyes. Imagine the plain at dusk. The light is amber. The air is warm. And somewhere, just below the horizon, the silhouette of something enormous is fading, not quite gone, not quite remembered, pressed into clay and scattered across the earth like a word in a language you almost understand. If you've enjoyed this story, you can subscribe. More like this, next week. Sleep well.